The door of the Silver Pine Diner slammed open at 11:40 at night, and a man fell through it, dripping rain and something darker onto the checkered floor. Grace Miller dropped the coffee pot she was holding. It shattered, but she did not even look down. The man was tall, wrapped in a torn gray coat, and he was pressing one hand hard against his side. His face was pale, in a way that made her stomach twist. Behind him, through the wet glass, headlights swung into the parking lot. 3 sets of them, fast. He looked up at her, and for one strange second, Grace forgot how to breathe. His eyes were dark, almost black, but there was something behind them, something that seemed to burn, like a candle behind smoked glass. "Please," he said. His voice was low and rough. "I only need a minute." Grace had worked at the Silver Pine for 4 years. She had served truckers, drifters, lost tourists, and men who tipped in loose coins and bad jokes. She had learned to read people the way other folks read weather, and every instinct she had was screaming that the men in those cars outside were not coming for coffee. "Kitchen," she said. "Now. Through that door, behind the shelves. There is a cold room. Go." He did not argue. He moved faster than a wounded man should have been able to move, and by the time the front door banged open again, Grace was on her knees with a rag, picking up broken glass like it was the most normal night in the world. 3 men walked in. They wore long black coats that did not fit the small town of Hollow Creek, and their boots were too clean for the muddy season. The one in front had a scar across his jaw and eyes the color of dirty ice. He scanned the room slowly. 2 old regulars, Pete and Harold, sat in the corner booth over pie. An exhausted mother and her sleeping toddler sat near the window. That was all. "We are looking for a man," the scarred one said. "Tall, injured. He came this way." Grace stood up, wiped her hands on her apron, and gave him the smile she saved for customers who complained about free refills. "Lots of tall men come through here," she said. "It is a diner on a highway. You want coffee or not?" The scarred man stepped closer. Grace could smell rain and metal on him, and underneath that something wild, like wet fur and pine sap. It made the hair on her arms rise. "He came this way," the man repeated. "The trail ends at your door." "Trail," Grace said. "What are you, bloodhounds?" "The only thing that ends at my door is the lunch special. Kitchen closes at midnight. You have 20 minutes. For a long moment, nobody moved. Pete and Harold had gone very quiet in their booth. The rain drummed on the roof. Then the scarred man smiled, and it was the coldest thing Grace had ever seen on a human face. "Check the back," he said to the others. Grace stepped in front of the kitchen door before she even realized she was doing it. "Employees only," she said. "Health code. You want to see the kitchen? Come back with a badge." The second man, younger, with a shaved head, laughed softly. "She smells like him," he said. He touched her. She helped him. "I hand people menus for a living," Grace snapped. "I touch everybody. Now sit down or get out." Later, she would never be able to explain why she did not just step aside. She owed the stranger nothing. She had bills stacked on her kitchen table at home, her mother's hospital debts still following her 2 years after the funeral, a landlord who counted days like a hawk counts mice. She had every reason in the world to protect herself, and no reason at all to protect a bleeding man she had known for 90 seconds. But her mother had raised her on one simple rule. When someone runs to your door, you do not hand them to the wolves. The scarred man reached inside his coat. Grace saw the shape of what he pulled out, black and heavy, and her whole body went cold. The tired mother by the window gasped and pulled her toddler close. "Last chance," the scarred man said. "Step aside." "No," Grace said. It was a small word. It came out steadier than she felt. What happened next happened all at once. The kitchen door exploded outward behind her. The stranger came through it like a storm given a body, and the scarred man's arm jerked toward Grace, and there was a sound like the sky cracking in half. Something punched into her shoulder, spun her sideways, and dropped her against the counter. The pain arrived a second later, white and enormous, swallowing everything. Through a gray haze, Grace saw impossible things. She saw the stranger move so fast he blurred, saw him catch the scarred man by the coat and throw him through the front window, as if he weighed nothing. She saw the shaved man swing at him, and miss again, and then fold to the floor with one strike she never even saw land. She heard the third one running, heard tires screaming in the wet lot, heard Pete shouting into the phone for an ambulance. And then the stranger was kneeling over her, and his eyes were not dark anymore. They were gold. Bright, burning, impossible gold, like twin suns in a pale face. "Why?" he whispered. His hands pressed against her shoulder, and they were warm. Warmer than any hands had a right to be. "You do not even know me. Why did you stand there?" Grace tried to answer. Something about menus. Something about her mother. Something about how everybody deserves one door that does not open for the wolves. But the words dissolved before they reached her lips, and the diner lights smeared into long ribbons. And the last thing she felt was the strange heat of his hands, sinking into her skin. And the last thing she heard was his voice, low and shaking, saying words that made no sense at all. "Stay with me. I am not letting the debt of the crown fall on a stranger. Stay with me, Grace Miller." She never told him her name. That thought followed her down into the dark. Grace woke to sunlight, birdsong, and a ceiling, made of dark polished wood that definitely did not belong to her one-room apartment above the laundromat. She sat up fast, and that was her first mistake, because her shoulder should have screamed. It did not. It ached, faintly, the way an old bruise aches. And when she pulled the collar of the soft white shirt someone had dressed her in, she found only a thin pink line, where a wound should have been. "3 days," said a voice from the doorway. "You slept for 3 days." The stranger stood there, and he looked nothing like the drowned, bleeding man from the diner. He wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled, and he stood the way mountains stand, like the world arranged itself around him, and not the other way. His eyes were dark again, but now that she knew what hid behind them, she could not stop looking for the gold. 3 days, Grace repeated. Her voice came out cracked. "That is not possible. I was shot. People do not sleep off being shot, like it is a head cold." "You were healed," he said simply. "There is a difference." Grace looked around the room. Tall windows. Mountains outside. Green and endless. No town in sight. Heavy old furniture. A fire laid ready in a stone hearth. Everything smelled of cedar and rain and money. "Where am I?" she asked. "Safe." "That is not a place," she said. "That is an adjective. Try again." Something flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it. Surprise, maybe. Or the ghost of a smile. "You are in my home," he said. "In the Black Ridge Mountains. Far from Hollow Creek. Far from the men who came for me." "Great," Grace said. "Wonderful. And who exactly are you? And why did 3 men in funeral coats want you badly enough to shoot a waitress? And why does my shoulder look like it happened last year? And why, and this is the part I keep snagging on, did your eyes glow?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, somewhere below the window, Grace heard voices, many of them, and the rhythmic sound of feet moving in unison, like soldiers drilling. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said at last, "and the honest answer to your questions will sound like madness." "I watched you throw a grown man through a window like a paper airplane," Grace said. "My bar for madness has moved." Adrian crossed the room and stopped at the window, looking down at whatever was happening in the courtyard below. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like a man walking on lake ice. "There is a world that lives beside yours," he said. "It has lived there for 1,000 years, in the deep forests and the high mountains, behind old treaties and older silence. My people can wear 2 shapes. The one you see now, and another, faster, stronger, wilder." Grace stared at the line of his back. "Say it," she said. "Whatever the word is, just say it, because my imagination is currently doing terrible things." "Wolves," Adrian said. "We are wolves, Grace. And I am not only one of them. I am their king." The room was very quiet. Down in the courtyard, someone barked an order, and dozens of voices answered as one. Grace did the only sensible thing a person could do with that information. She laughed. It burst out of her, sharp and slightly hysterical, and she pressed her hand over her mouth, and it kept coming anyway. Adrian turned and watched her with an expression that suggested no one had laughed in that room in a very long time. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I am sorry. It is just, I make $8 an hour plus tips. Last week my biggest problem was a man who sent back his eggs 4 times. And now you are standing there with a face like a sad statue, telling me you are the king of the wolves." "Alpha King," Adrian said, "of the 7 packs of the Northern Territories, and the men who came to your diner serve my uncle, who believes the throne should have been his. They had been hunting me for 2 days. I was ambushed, cut off from my guard, wounded with silver, which is the one thing my body cannot easily heal. Your diner was the first door with light behind it. The laughter drained out of Grace slowly, because he was not smiling, and because deep down, under the disbelief, she kept seeing those golden eyes. She kept feeling the unnatural heat of his hands on her shoulder. "Okay," she said quietly. "Suppose I believe you. Suppose I skip past the part where I need to sit in a dark room for a week. When can I go home?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "That is the difficulty," he said. "The men who attacked us saw your face. They know you sheltered me. They know you took a wound meant for me, and in our world, that is not a small thing. It is an old debt, written in the oldest law we have. Blood spilled for the crown binds the crown. My uncle knows that law, which means he knows that the fastest way to reach me now is through you." Grace stood up. The floor was cold under her bare feet, and her legs shook, but she stood anyway, because some conversations should not be had lying down. "So what you are telling me," she said, "is that I am stuck here." "You are protected here," Adrian said. "Same sentence, better paint," Grace answered. "I have a job, Adrian. I have rent due in 6 days. I have a plant that will absolutely die without me, and it is the only living thing I have managed to keep alive in 2 years, and I am weirdly attached to it." "I will handle your rent," he said. "Your job. Whatever ties you have, I will see them held for you. But I cannot let you walk out of these mountains, while my uncle's hunters are searching every road out of Hollow Creek with your description. His name is Victor Cole, and he does not leave loose threads alive." The word alive landed in the room like a dropped plate. Grace wrapped her arms around herself. Through the window she could see them now, the people in the courtyard. Dozens of them, men and women, moving through fighting drills with a speed that did not look quite human. And at the edge of the yard, watching her window with open suspicion, stood a broad man with a gray-streaked beard and eyes like flint. "Who is that?" she asked. "Nathan," Adrian said. "My second. My beta. He believes bringing a human inside these walls is the worst decision I have made in 10 years of rule." "And is it?" Grace asked. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face shifted, something old and tired, and quietly astonished, like a man who had walked out of a long winter into a room with a fire. "Ask me again in a month," he said, and left her standing in the sunlight with a healed shoulder, a racing heart, and the slow, cold realization that her whole life had just been carried off by wolves. The first week at Blackridge taught Grace 3 things. The first was that wolves ate an astonishing amount of breakfast. The second was that a human walking through their halls drew stares, the way a spark draws eyes in a dark room. The third was that she was terrible at doing nothing. By the 4th morning, she had found her way into the estate kitchens, rolled up her sleeves, and informed the head cook, a stern, round woman named Martha, that she had 4 years of diner experience, and if someone did not give her a task, she was going to lose her mind. Martha looked her up and down, handed her a crate of potatoes, and said nothing, which in Blackridge apparently counted as a warm welcome. That was where Lucy found her. Lucy was 19, small and quick, with nervous hands and a smile she kept half hidden, as if she was not sure she was allowed to use it. She was what the wolves called an omega, which as far as Grace could tell meant that everyone else felt free to hand her their worst chores. Lucy brought Grace tea without being asked, answered her endless questions in a whisper, and within days had attached herself to Grace's side, like a shadow that had finally found a person worth following. It was Lucy who explained the things Adrian did not, that the 7 packs had been at peace for a generation, because Adrian's father built that peace with his own hands. That 6 years ago, on a night no one at Blackridge would speak of above a whisper, the old king and his wife, and Adrian's younger sister had all died in a fire that was no accident. That Victor, the king's own brother, had been tried for it, and could not be proven guilty, and had been exiled instead of executed, and had spent 6 years in the far wastes, gathering every outcast, every criminal, every wolf with a grudge, into something the border patrols now called the Ash Pack. "He never smiles," Lucy whispered one afternoon, meaning Adrian, "not since the fire. The old ones say the flame went out of the whole house that night. He rules well, he is fair, but it is like being ruled by winter." Grace thought about that in the evenings, when she sat by the window of her room and watched Adrian cross the courtyard below after the day's training. The wolves bowed as he passed, and he acknowledged every single one, and spoke to no one, and ate alone, and worked in his study, until the lamps burned out. A king of winter. It made something in her chest ache in a way she did not examine too closely. She started small, because small was what she knew. She learned the guards' names, all of them, and which ones took sugar in their coffee. She badgered Martha into making an actual pie, instead of what the wolves called dessert, which was fruit, just fruit, like animals. She taught Lucy to play cards, and lost to her on purpose, until Lucy learned to win, and then Lucy beat her honestly, and glowed about it for a whole day. The wolves did not know what to do with her. She was small, breakable, human, and she moved through their fortress of silence, like an open window in a shut house. Old warriors caught themselves telling her about their grandchildren. The gate guards started arguing about whose turn it was to walk her to the kitchens. Even Martha, who according to Lucy had not praised anyone since the last king's coronation, was heard to say that the human's pie crust was acceptable, which caused a minor sensation. Only Nathan remained stone. The beta watched her the way a man watches a slow leak in a boat. Twice he told Adrian, in her hearing, not caring that she heard, that every day the human stayed she learned more about their world than any human had known in a century, and that knowledge walking around on two fragile legs was a danger to every wolf in the mountains. "And she cannot leave," Nathan said one evening in the great hall, his voice carrying. "So think, my king, about what that means, about the only two ways this ends." Grace did think about it. She thought about it that night, staring at the ceiling. She was still thinking about it when she gave up on sleep, wrapped herself in a blanket, and padded down to the kitchens for warm milk like a child, and found the alpha king of the 7 packs, sitting alone at the huge scarred table in the dark, with cold coffee in front of him and maps spread everywhere. "I could not sleep," they both said at the same time, and then stopped. Grace heated milk. She heated enough for 2 without asking, and set a cup in front of him, and sat down across the table, and for a while neither of them said anything, and the silence was strangely easy. The maps showed the border territories. Small red marks were scattered across them like a rash. "Attacks," Adrian said, when he saw her looking. "Raids. Victor is testing the edges. Every week, a little deeper. He is looking for a soft place." "He killed your family," Grace said quietly. "Lucy told me. I am sorry. I should not have asked her." "I would rather you hear it plainly than in whispers," Adrian said. "Yes, I believe he did. I could not prove it. And our law is our law. So he breathes, and he builds his army. And one day soon I will pay for that mercy." "You were how old?" Grace asked, "when it happened." 23, he said. "I was crowned before the ashes were cold. There were 7 packs looking at a broken boy and deciding whether to tear the piece apart. So the boy could not be broken. Not visibly, not ever." He said it flatly, like a weather report, and that was somehow worse than tears would have been. "My mother got sick when I was 22, Grace heard herself say. 2 years, beginning to end. I worked 3 jobs and sold everything we had, and it did not matter. The bills just grew like weeds. And one morning she was gone, and the bills stayed. And everyone kept telling me how strong I was. Strong, strong, strong. And I wanted to scream at them that I was not strong. I was just cornered. And those are not the same thing." Adrian looked at her across the cold maps. "No," he said slowly. "They are not. You are the first person I have ever heard say that out loud." "Well," Grace said, lifting her milk in a small toast, "to the cornered." And then it happened. Brief, unpracticed, crooked at one edge, gone, almost before it landed. Adrian Cole smiled. Grace carried that smile back up to her room like a stolen candle, and Lucy noticed the change in her at breakfast, and Martha noticed, and the guards noticed, and by nightfall, the whole fortress was quietly buzzing with impossible news. Somewhere far to the north, in a camp of ash and iron, Victor Cole was told by his spies that the king had taken a human under his roof, and that he guarded her closely, and Victor, who had spent 6 years searching for a soft place in his nephew's armor, began, slowly, to smile as well. The change crept up on Adrian like frost on glass, so slowly he could not name the hour it began. He noticed it first in small ways. He knew when Grace entered a room before the door opened. He could pick her heartbeat out of a fortress full of heartbeats, the way a mother hears her own child in a crowded market. When she laughed in the kitchens, 3 floors below his study, His pen would stop moving. When Nathan mentioned her name in a briefing, something in his chest turned over like a key in a lock. His wolf knew before he did. The wolf had been quiet for 6 years, a gray, cold presence at the bottom of his mind, dutiful and joyless. Now it paced, now it pulled toward the kitchens, toward the gardens, toward the sound of her voice, with a single word rolling through it like distant thunder, over and over, a word Adrian refused to hear. Dr. Eleanor Wade heard it for him. She was the oldest healer at Blackridge, and she had delivered Adrian into the world with her own hands, and she was therefore the only living soul with the nerve to sit across from the Alpha King, look him dead in the eye, and say the thing everyone else was whispering. "It is the bond," Eleanor said. "You know it is. I watched you carry that girl in from the transport, with a silver wound in your own side, that you had not even mentioned to anyone, and I watched the wound close by morning, which silver wounds do not do, unless the wolf has found a reason to live that it did not have the night before. It is the mate bond, Adrian. It chose her." "She is human," Adrian said. "The bond does not read bloodlines," Eleanor said. "It reads souls. It is older than our laws and it does not care about them, which is more than I can say for your council." The council. Adrian closed his eyes. The council was already circling. 7 packs, 7 senior voices, and every one of them had spent the past month watching Victor's raids creep deeper into the borderlands and reaching the same conclusion. The kingdom needed the northern pack, the largest and richest of the 7, bound to the crown by more than words, and the northern pack had Helen Ward, the Alpha's daughter, a Luna in her own right, brilliant and iron-willed, whose marriage to the king would lock the north to the throne with chains of family. They put it to him formally that same week, in the long stone council chamber, with the 7 banners hanging overhead. Old Councillor Frank Dawson laid it out in his dry, patient voice. The alliance, the wedding, the timing, before the summer, before Victor moved in force. And then Dawson paused, folded his papers, and added, almost gently, that there was one further matter, that the council was aware of the situation with the human woman, and that certain rumors of a bond, whether true or not, must be put to rest, and that the old right of rejection existed for a reason, and that no one in the room doubted the king would place his people above his private heart, as he always had. Adrian sat very still at the head of that table, and inside him, the wolf rose up in a snarl that shook his bones, and outside, nothing showed on his face at all, because outside, nothing was allowed to. 10 years of winter had taught him that. "I will consider the northern proposal," he said, and his voice was flat and even. "This session is closed." He did not sleep that night. He stood at his window until dawn, and the wolf paced with him, mile after mile inside his skin. What Adrian did not know, because winters see poorly, was that the servant's stair beside the council chamber carried sound like a pipe, and that Grace had been coming up it with a tray for old Dawson, whom she had adopted the way she adopted every lonely creature at Blackridge. She heard the word alliance. She heard the word wedding, and the name Helen Ward, and then she heard the phrase right of rejection, and the tray went so heavy in her hands she had to set it down on the step. She sat on the cold stair for a long time. The stupid thing, she told Lucy afterward, in the safety of her room, was that she had no right to be hurt. None. Nobody had promised her anything. He was a king, an actual king with banners, and she was a waitress whose greatest asset was a good pie crust, and whatever she had felt growing in the quiet spaces between them, the late kitchen talks, the way he had started finding excuses to walk the gardens when she was in them, the smile that only she seemed able to summon, all of that was just a lonely man thawing slightly, and she had let herself dream on it like a fool. Lucy sat beside her, wringing her hands and looking anguished, because Lucy knew things about bonds that humans did not, and had been strictly forbidden to speak of them. "There is more to it," Lucy tried. "Grace, there are things you do not understand. If he agrees to the right, it is not like breaking off an engagement. It hurts. It is like tearing out a—" "Lucy," Grace said gently, "it is fine. Truly. It is his world and his war and his choice, and I am a complication he never asked for. The kindest thing I can do for him is stop being one." She said it calmly. She even smiled. And Lucy, 19 and trusting, believed the calm, and did not understand until the next morning what it had actually meant. Because at some point that night, between the last patrol and first light, Grace packed the small bag she had arrived with, wrote 2 notes, one thanking Martha and one that said simply, "Thank you for the milk, tell them the pie recipe stays with Lucy," and walked out through the delivery gate, whose guard rotation she knew by heart, because she had made a point of learning everyone, and everyone had long since stopped watching the harmless human. She was 3 miles down the mountain road in the gray dawn, cold and heartbroken, and telling herself firmly that hearts healed and rent was real, when she noticed that the birds had gone silent, and that the shadows between the pines on both sides of the road were moving against the wind. They came out of the trees without a sound, 6 of them, and Grace knew at one glance that these were not Adrian's wolves. Adrian's people moved like soldiers. These moved like hunger. Their clothes were patched and ash-gray, their faces lean, and at their head walked a man she recognized from her nightmares, the scarred jaw, the eyes like dirty ice, the same one from the diner, and he was smiling. "Well," he said, "the king's little treasure, gift-wrapped and walking down the mountain all alone. Some days the moon just loves us." Grace ran. She made it maybe 20 steps, which she was later told was 20 steps more than most people managed, before the world spun and the road hit her, and rough hands pulled a hood over her head, and everything became darkness, engine noise, and the long cold arithmetic of fear. The Ashpack camp crouched in a dead valley 2 territories north, a sprawl of iron sheds and old mine works, under a sky the color of dishwater. They put her in a storeroom with a barred window and a bolted door, and for a day nobody spoke to her at all, which gave her plenty of time to be terrified, and, being Grace, plenty of time to get tired of being terrified and start paying attention instead. She noticed the guards were underfed. She noticed they flinched at loud commands, all of them, like people who had been flinching for years. She noticed that twice a day, a thin girl with haunted eyes brought food that was mostly water, pretending to be soup, and that the girl's hands shook, and by the second visit, Grace had learned her name, Amy, and by the third visit, Amy was lingering an extra minute at the door, because no one in that gray valley had asked her a kind question in longer than she could remember. On the second evening, the bolt slid back, and Victor Cole came in person. He looked like Adrian run through winter twice, taller, grayer, with the same strong lines in his face but nothing behind them except patience, the terrible patience of a man who had been sharpening one single grudge for 6 years. He carried a chair in, set it down, sat, and studied Grace like a document. "You are smaller than I expected," he said, "given the noise you have caused. Do you know what you are, girl?" "Underpaid," Grace said. Her voice only shook a little. Something flickered in Victor's face, not quite amusement. "You are leverage," he said. "My nephew broke 6 years of pattern for you. He guards you, houses you, heals you with his own strength, and the moment he learns I have you, he will come north with his teeth bare and his judgment drowned, and he will make the kind of mistakes that lose thrones. You are the soft place, girl. I have been searching for it a long time." "He is not coming," Grace said. "Your spies are behind. The council chose him a queen. I am nobody. You have kidnapped a pastry cook." Victor leaned forward, and his nostrils flared slightly, and his eyes narrowed, and for the first time his composure moved, like ice creaking on a pond. "Interesting," he said softly. "You believe that. You actually believe you are nobody." Then he tilted his head, and his gaze dropped to her collarbone, to the thin silver chain she had worn every day since her mother died, and the small worn pendant on it, a flat disc of pale metal with a faint tree stamped into it, so rubbed by generations of thumbs that the branches were nearly gone. "Where?" Victor said, and his voice had changed. "Did you get that?" "My mother," Grace said, her hand closing over it on instinct. It was her mother's. "It is worthless. It is not even real silver. The pawn shop would not." Victor stood so fast the chair went over, and the pendant answered him. It grew warm against Grace's palm, then hot, not burning her, never her, but blazing against the air of the room, and a light woke inside the pale metal, a clean silver glow that poured out between her fingers, and the closer Victor stepped, the fiercer it burned, and the great gray alpha of the Ashpack, who feared nothing alive, stopped moving. "That is not possible," he whispered. "The silver line is dead. My grandfather's generation ended it. Every family, every child, we made sure." And his voice cracked on the word "we," in a way that told Grace, in one freezing instant, that she was looking at something worse than a kidnapper. "What is the silver line?" Grace said. Victor stared at her over the burning light, and then he laughed, one short broken sound, and there was no joy in it at all, only a kind of horrified wonder. Healers, he said. Blood bound to the moon itself. In the old age, no king was crowned without one standing at his shoulder. Where a silver stood, wounds closed, curses failed, and no false alpha could hold a stolen throne, because their light burns hottest, girl, in the presence of blood guilt. He looked down at his own hands, lit silver white by the glow pouring from her fist. And it seems, he said quietly, that it remembers me. He backed to the door. He did not turn away from her, Grace noticed. He backed, like a man leaving a fire. Triple the guard, she heard him snap in the corridor. Silver chain on the door. And send word to the border teams, all of them. The plan moves up. We go before the king learns what I am holding, because if that girl comes into her blood inside my own gates, no wall I have will matter. The bolt slammed. The light in the pendant faded slowly, like an ember settling, and Grace sat down on the cold floor of the storeroom, opened her shaking hand, and looked at her mother's worthless necklace, glowing softly against her palm. "Mom," she whispered, "we really need to talk." And 2 territories south, in a fortress gone mad with alarm bells, Adrian Cole stood in the empty room that still smelled of her, holding a note about pie, while his wolf rose through him like a flood breaking a dam. And when he turned to the gathered warriors, his eyes were not gold. They were burning, and the voice that came out of him was 2 voices at once, man and wolf together, and it said one word. North. Nathan tried to stop him at the gates. It took courage, and Nathan had never lacked that. He stood in front of the king's transport with his arms crossed, and laid out the truth like stones. Crossing 2 territories in force without council approval would fracture the alliance. Victor wanted exactly this, the king raging north with his guards strung out behind him. It was a trap, with the door standing wide open, and everyone could see it, and the wise move, the kingly move, was to wait, negotiate, mass the packs properly. Adrian listened to all of it. Then he said, quietly, "Nathan, 6 years ago I did the wise thing. I let the law spare my family's killer, because that was the kingly move. I have been paying interest on that wisdom ever since, and so has everyone in these mountains. Not this time. Stand aside, or stand with me." Nathan looked at his king for a long moment, at the burning eyes, at the set of him, and something the old beta had been holding on to for 6 years, some grief of his own, shifted and let go. "Ah, moon take it," Nathan said. "I always hated the wise thing." He climbed into the transport. Drive. They gathered strength as they went, and this was the thing Victor had not planned for, because Victor understood fear and force, and had forgotten what loyalty looked like when it was freely given. Word ran ahead of the king's column like fire through dry grass, and the word was not "the king marches." The word was, "They took our grace." The border packs remembered the human who had learned their guards' names. The river pack turned out because Martha's sister had married into it, and Martha had sent one furious letter. By the time the column reached the hills above the dead valley, it had tripled, and it was angry, in the way that only quiet, decent folk can be angry. Inside the camp, Grace had spent 2 days doing what she did best. Amy now smuggled her news with the soup. Half the ash pack, Grace had learned, were not villains at all. They were the desperate, debtors and exiles, and starving families, who had followed Victor because he fed them, and who flinched at his commands, because they had seen what happened to those who questioned them. There was a whole shed of them on the east side, the ones Victor called half-loyal, families with children, kept close so they could not run. "There is a woman there whose boy has the coughing sickness," Amy whispered through the bars. "The healers gave up on him. She heard about your light. She begged me to ask." Grace looked at the pendant. It had glowed for guilt, if Victor was to be believed. She had no idea if it could do anything else. Everything Victor had said about healers and old kings sounded like a story about somebody else. "Bring him tonight," she said anyway, "because when someone runs to your door, you do not hand them to the wolves, even when your door is a locked storeroom in an enemy camp." Amy managed it during the guard change, a rushed, terrified minute, the mother pressing a small hot bundle of a boy up to the barred window. Grace could not even reach him properly. She got one hand through the bars and laid it on the child's damp forehead, and closed her eyes, and had absolutely no idea what to do, so she did what she had done at 100 sickbeds in her old life. at her mother's bedside for 2 long years. She stopped being afraid of the sickness and simply refused to leave. She poured her whole stubborn heart down through her hand, the same worn-out love that had spooned soup and changed sheets and sung badly at 3 in the morning, and thought, as hard as she had ever thought anything, "Get well. You hear me? Get well." The pendant lit like a lantern. Warmth ran down her arm and out of her palm, and the boy's rattling breath eased, and smoothed out into the deep clean rhythm of ordinary sleep, and his fever broke like a wave on sand. On the other side of the bars, his mother made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a prayer, and dropped to her knees. By dawn the East Shed knew. By noon, half the camp knew, passed mouth to mouth in whispers, the old words coming back up out of grandmother stories. The silver line, the moon's own healers, the light that stands beside true kings. And Victor felt his camp change around him the way a captain feels the sea change, and could not find the leak, and doubled the guards again, and the guards he doubled were flinching men who had heard the whispers too. That night the horns sounded from the hills, and the sky to the south filled with torches, and Victor Cole climbed his iron watchtower, and saw not the strung-out reckless column he had planned to swallow, but a sea of wolves, from 5 packs, standing shoulder to shoulder in ordered lines, and at the front of them, unarmored, in plain black, walked his brother's son. Adrian stopped 100 paces from the gates. He did not shout. He did not need to. Wolf hearing carries far. "Victor," he said, "this once, hear me. I know what fills your camp, the hungry and the cornered. I make them this offer. Every soul who opens these gates tonight and walks out unarmed comes home under my protection, with their debts to the crown forgiven, and no questions carried forward." He paused. "And to you, uncle, I make no offer at all. You know what stands between us." Silence hung over the dead valley. Then Victor laughed from his tower, and gave the order his whole strategy rested on: seize the girl, bring her to the wall where the king could see her, and end this the ugly way. But the guards he sent were the flinching men, and the corridor to the storeroom ran past the east shed, and the mother of a boy who was, at that very moment, sleeping soundly for the first time in a month, stepped into that corridor with 40 desperate families behind her, and folded her arms, and did not move. And somewhere under the shouting that followed, small and almost lost, came the sound of a bolt being drawn back by a thin girl with shaking hands, and Amy's whisper through the open door: "Run, Grace, your king is at the gate." The camp came apart like a rotten rope. Gates that should have held were opened from the inside. Whole squads of Ashpack fighters laid their weapons in the mud and walked south, with their hands empty and their families behind them, toward the promise the king had shouted across the valley, and Adrian's wolves parted ranks and let them through, because he had given his word, and in the mountains, the king's word was weather, it simply was. But Victor had kept a core, the true loyal, the ones with too much blood on their hands to accept any amnesty, and they fell back through the iron sheds toward the old mine works, fighting for every yard, and the dead valley filled with smoke, and the clash of bodies, and the deep tearing choruses of wolves in their second shape. Grace ran through the middle of it, with Amy's hand locked in hers, hood up, head down, following the corridor of families streaming toward the south gate. She could see it ahead, the open ground, the torchlight, the ordered lines. She could see, unbelievably, Nathan of all people, anchoring the gate, bellowing directions at the refugees, with the same flint face he used for everything, steering children behind the shield line like a stern gray sheepdog. They were 50 steps from safety when Lucy found her. Lucy, who had stowed away in the supply transport because she would not be left behind, who had been carrying water to the wounded at the gate, and who saw Grace and lit up like sunrise and ran to her, calling her name. And behind Lucy, out of the smoke, came the scarred man. He was wounded, and cornered, and past caring, and he had spent days hearing what the human woman had cost his master, and here she was in the open. Grace saw him raise his arm. She saw the black shape in his hand, the same shape from the diner, pointed at her, and she had one heartbeat to decide, and it was not even a decision. It was just who she was, because Lucy was directly in the line, and Lucy was 19, and had finally learned to win at cards. Grace pulled Lucy behind her, and turned her own body into the shot. The world cracked, the impact took her high in the chest, and the ground swung up and caught her. and the noise of the battle went strange and far away, like sounds heard underwater. She was aware of Lucy screaming. She was aware of the scarred man being simply erased from the world by something huge and black and golden-eyed that arrived like a landslide. She was aware, as the great black wolf shifted mid-stride into a man, of Adrian's face above hers, and his hands pressing down against the wrong warmth spreading through her shirt, and his voice saying her name, in a tone she had never heard from him, cracked wide open, all the winter gone. "No," he was saying. "No, no, not this, not you, heal. Why is it not healing? Eleanor, Eleanor." And old Eleanor Wade was there, dropping to her knees in the mud, tearing the cloth back, and going still. "Silver," Eleanor said. "The round was silver. It is meant for us. It should pass through a human, but it has splintered. It is near her heart, and it is poisoning as it goes. Adrian. Adrian, look at me. This is beyond my craft. Nothing heals silver." The battle still rumbled somewhere at the edge of things, but around the three of them, a strange quiet spread. Grace could feel herself going somewhere. It did not hurt much anymore, which even she knew was a bad sign. She looked up at Adrian, at his ruined face, and found, absurdly, that her chief feeling was embarrassment at causing all this fuss. "Twice," she managed. "You are going to think I do this on purpose." "Do not," Adrian said. His tears were falling on her face, and she felt each one land warm. "Do not joke. Do not leave. That is an order from your king. Do you hear me? I am ordering you." "I never," Grace whispered, "actually agreed to be one of your subjects." And then, through the gray closing in, she heard Eleanor's voice change, sharpen, catch fire. "The pendant. Look at the pendant. Girl, listen to me. Grace. Your light heals everything the moon has touched, and silver is the moon's own metal. Do you understand? Silver is not your poison, it is your inheritance. It cannot heal you from outside. But you, child, you can claim it from within. Stop fighting the metal, call it yours." It made no sense. Nothing about the last month had made sense. Grace was so tired, and the dark was so soft at the edges, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world to let go, and afterwards she was never able to fully explain what she did instead, only that she stopped treating the burning splinters near her heart as an enemy, and reached for them the way she reached for every hurting thing that had ever come through her door, and thought, "All right then, you are mine too, come here." The pendant did not glow this time, it blazed. Silver light erupted from her, through her, a soundless flood that rolled out across the mud and the wounded and the ash-gray sheds, and every wolf in the dead valley, friend and enemy alike, stopped where they stood and turned toward it, because their blood remembered that light from 1,000 years of grandmother stories, even though their eyes had never seen it. Inside Grace, the splinters melted like frost in the sun, became warmth, became hers. The wound closed. The poison unmade itself. And the light kept going. It found the wounded wolves lying in the mud and closed them. It found the coughing children among the refugees. It found old Eleanor's crooked hands and unbent 40 years of ache. It rolled to the feet of Victor's last hard core at the mine mouth, the guilt carriers, and where it touched them it burned white, and they broke and fled from it into the tunnels, screaming. When it faded, Grace was sitting up in the mud in the sudden ringing silence, whole, glowing faintly, held so tightly in Adrian's arms she could barely breathe, and around them, in a slow spreading wave, 5 packs of wolves and one entire camp of former enemies sank to their knees. "Oh no," said Grace Miller, waitress, into the silence. "Everyone please get up." Nobody got up. Victor was not among the kneeling, and not among the fled. In the chaos of the light, he had done what patient men do. He had vanished, taking a handful of his oldest killers and the contents of his war chest, down through the mine tunnels, and out some bolt hole, known only to him. And when Adrian's trackers went down after him, they found cold ash, and a message scratched into the tunnel wall. "This changes the timing." Nothing else. So the war was not over. But everything else had changed, and the weeks that followed turned the mountains upside down. The column came home to Blackridge like a festival, swollen with amnestied families, and Martha took one look at the state of the refugee children and commandeered 3 kitchens. Amy was formally adopted by the entire Guard Corps, who competed so fiercely to teach her things that Nathan had to post a schedule. Lucy walked around for days with the particular shine of a person who had been publicly named by the king, in front of everyone, as the friend Grace Miller judged worth her life, which in Wolf terms, was a title outranking most nobility. The council convened within the week, and Grace was summoned, and she went in expecting judgment, and found instead 7 senior wolves, and one very uncomfortable atmosphere. Old Frank Dawson rose, cleared his throat several times, and delivered the findings of the archivists. The silver bloodline was confirmed. Her mother's line traced back through hidden generations, healers who had fled the purges a century ago and buried themselves in human towns, wearing their heritage as cheap jewelry, telling their daughters nothing to keep them safe. Under the oldest law of the Pax, the law that outranked even the crown, a confirmed silver stood outside all political authority. She could not be commanded, could not be detained, could not be wed for alliance. Wherever she chose to stand was, by definition, the right place. Which brings the council, Dawson said, looking like a man passing a kidney stone, to the matter of the northern proposal, and to a delegation that arrived this morning. Helen Ward had come in person. Grace had spent weeks quietly hating the idea of her, and was therefore completely unprepared for the reality. A sharp, funny, immensely capable woman of 30, who took Grace's arm, steered her into a window alcove and said, in a low voice, "Thank the moon. You have no idea what you have saved me from. I have been in love with my father's harbor master for 6 years. The man builds boats. He has forearms like oak. Marry your king quickly, Silver, so my father runs out of arguments." "He is not my king," Grace said automatically. Helen looked at her with genuine pity. "Oh, you poor thing," she said. "You are the only person on this mountain who still believes that." But it was not that simple. And Grace's stubbornness on the point ran deeper than pride. It was hurt. He had been ready to reject the bond, or at least he had sat in that council chamber and not refused, and she had heard it, and been shot, and kidnapped, and transformed, and she was not going to fall into anyone's arms, just because the paperwork now permitted it. Adrian understood. That was the thing that undid her, slowly, through those weeks. He did not press. He did not perform. He simply changed, or rather, unfroze, and let her watch it happen. The king who had eaten alone for 6 years now ate in the great hall, at the long table, wedged between refugee children who had no idea who he was, and told him extremely long stories about frogs. He laughed now, not often, but really, and every single time, half the room turned to look, still unused to the sound. He formally struck the right of rejection from the law books, not for himself, he told the council, but so that no wolf after him would ever sit in that chamber and be advised to tear out his own soul as a matter of policy. And one evening, he found Grace in the kitchen garden and told her the whole truth of that council day, plainly, without excuses, that he had been ready to refuse them outright, and had hesitated one day, one single day, to count what refusal would cost his people in the war that was coming, because that was the arithmetic he had been trained to do since the fire. And in that one day of hesitation, she had heard the worst version of him, and walked out the gate into Victor's hands, and he would carry that until he died. "I am not asking you to forgive the hesitation," he said. "I am telling you that you were shot because of it, and that I know it, and that whatever you decide it knowing the whole account." Grace stood among Martha's herb beds, looking at this man who had knelt in the mud and ordered her not to die, this king who ate frog stories for dinner now, and felt the last of her anger sigh and lie down. "I need to say something," she said, "and you are going to let me finish. I am not a Luna. I do not know your dances or your laws. I have an 8th grade understanding of your politics, and I will absolutely feed your enemies pie if they look hungry. If this bond of yours needs someone royal, it has picked the wrong woman. And if you need someone who will stand behind your chair and be ornamental, you have definitely got the wrong woman. So before this goes one step further, I need to know exactly what you think you are asking for." Adrian considered the question with the gravity of state. "I am asking," he said, "for the person who stood in front of a stranger and said no. I have an entire mountain of people who obey me, Grace. I am asking for the one person who never will." "Well," Grace said, when she could speak, "that is unfortunately a really good answer." Somewhere in the herb beds behind them, extremely poorly hidden, Lucy and Amy and 2 off-duty guards and, inexplicably, Counselor Dawson, all began pretending very hard that they were not there. Grace started to laugh, And under the first stars, in the garden, with half of Black Ridge eavesdropping shamelessly from the rosemary, the Alpha King of the 7 packs took the Waitress's hands and did the thing no Alpha King had done in 1,000 years of recorded law. He knelt. Which was, of course, the exact moment the alarm horns began to scream from the northern watchtowers. 3 long blasts, and 3 again. The code every wolf knew, and prayed never to hear. Invasion. Victor had spent his vanished weeks well. That was the report the scouts brought back through the freezing night, and it was worse than anyone had guessed. The war chest had gone into the far wastes, and come back as an army. Every rogue pack beyond the maps. Every exiled fighter with a grudge, bought or bullied under one banner, and at its core marched something the old wolves went pale to describe. 300 fighters who moved wrong, in perfect unison, with gray dust on their skin, and nothing behind their eyes. Curse forged, Eleanor said grimly, an abomination out of the Purge era. Fighters bound to a single will by dark craft, feeling no pain, no fear, and no mercy, because there was almost no one left inside them to feel anything at all. It is how the purges were done a century ago, she said. It is the craft his grandfather used to end the Silver Line. He has gone back to the old poison. Of course he has. It is the family recipe. They will not break, Nathan said flatly, studying the maps. Ordinary fighters break when enough falls apart around them. These will walk forward until they are destroyed, every single one. We can win and still lose everything we have, my king. The arithmetic is bad. Adrian looked at the map, at the pass where the dead-eyed army would funnel down toward the valleys where the amnestied families were settled, and made the dispositions of a man defending not ground but people. And then Grace, who had been standing at the map table this whole time, because no one alive could now tell her to leave a room, put her finger on the center of the pass, and asked the question that changed the war. You said the light burned Victor's guilty men, and they ran from it, she said. And Eleanor, you said the curse craft is moonwork, the same root as my blood, just twisted. So tell me honestly, if I stand in that pass and burn as bright as I can, what happens to 300 cursed fighters? The room went silent. Eleanor and Adrian exchanged a look over her head, and it was Eleanor who answered, slowly. Child, the craft binds what is left of them. Your light does not fight moonwork, it heals it. In theory, enough light does not burn those poor souls at all. It cuts their strings. In theory, Adrian said. No silver has ever tried it, Eleanor admitted. No silver has ever been mad enough to stand in front of a charge to try. Grace looked around the table, at the king who had knelt in the rosemary an hour ago, at flint-faced Nathan, at the map with its bad arithmetic, and shrugged with a calm she absolutely did not feel. I once worked a Sunday breakfast rush alone when both cooks quit, she said. Let us go cut some strings. The Battle of the Northern Pass began at gray dawn, and the histories of the packs would retell it for 100 years. How the rogue vanguard came down the funnel of stone and met 5 packs standing shoulder to shoulder and could not move them. How Helen Ward arrived mid-morning with the entire Northern pack behind her, having overruled her father by the simple method of leaving without permission, and slammed into the rogue flank like a door. How Nathan the Beta held the eastern shoulder of the pass through 3 assaults, and was heard, at the worst of it, to remark that he had experienced more difficult card games against Lucy. And then midday, and the sound that stopped every heart on the field, 300 sets of feet in perfect step, and the curse forged came down the pass in dead silence, and the defenders braced, and Adrian's voice rang out with the hardest order he had ever given, the order he had promised her he would give. Open ranks. The shield line split, and through the gap, alone, in a plain white coat with a cheap worn pendant blazing on her chest, walked Grace Miller into the path of the charge. She was terrified. She was allowed to be, she told herself, as long as her feet kept moving. She stopped 50 paces from the oncoming wall of empty eyes, planted herself in the frozen mud, thought of every stray dog, every free meal, every 3 in the morning at her mother's bedside, every soul that had ever run to her door, and she opened that door as wide as it had ever gone, and let everything pour out. The light that rose from the pass that day was seen from villages 40 miles south. It did not strike the curse forged, it received them. They marched into it, and slowed, like men walking into deep warm water, and one by one, the gray dust cracked and fell from their skin, and the terrible unison broke apart into stumbling, and 300 stolen people woke up. Some fell to their knees, some wept, calling out names of families they had not remembered in years. One gray-haired fighter sat down in the mud like a tired child and simply looked at his own hands, turning them over and over in the silver light. Victor's army watched their unbreakable core dissolve into weeping freed men, watched the impossible old stories stand glowing and undeniable in the middle of the pass, and understood at last what their master had led them against. The wastes bought their courage, and the light bankrupted it. The rogue banner wavered, tore, and fled north, and the war ended not with a final clash but with the long, ragged sound of an army refusing to exist anymore. Which left Victor. He came through the wreck of his own retreat in his second shape, one great scarred gray wolf who had nothing left but the grudge, and he did not run for the wastes, he ran for the light, for the girl standing spent and swaying at the center of it, because if he could not have the throne he would take its heart. And out of the broken shield line to meet him came a black wolf with golden eyes, and the pass shook, and this fight the histories would record honestly, as brutal and brief. 6 years, one fire, and a family's worth of grief met 300 pounds of ash-gray hatred on the frozen mud, and when it was finished, the black wolf stood, and the gray did not rise, and the long, patient grudge of Victor Cole was done at last, judged not by the law that had once spared him, but by the winter he had made. Adrian shifted and stood in the falling snow, and looked at his uncle's still form for a long moment, and Grace, stumbling through the mud to reach him, saw with perfect clarity that there was no triumph in his face at all, only an old tiredness, finally setting down its load. "It is over," she said, taking his hand. He looked at the pass, at the freed men weeping in the mud, at the packs standing shoulder to shoulder, at her. "No," he said, "it is beginning." The wedding took place at midsummer, and the 7 packs argued for weeks about everything, the venue, the precedence, the seating, until the bride ended all debate by announcing that it would be held outdoors, that every amnestied family and freed fighter was invited, that Martha had full authority over the food, and anyone who questioned her did so at their own risk, and that instead of the traditional exchange of jeweled gifts, guests were asked to bring one dish that meant home to them, because where she came from, that was how you found out who people really were. The council was scandalized. The council was overruled. The council, on the day itself, was later seen going back for third helpings. They came from every territory. Helen Ward arrived radiant, 1 week married to a harbor builder with forearms like oak, her father trailing behind them wearing the expression of a man who had lost every argument of the season and was slowly making peace with it. The freed men of the curse came together, 300 strong, and presented the crown with the only gift they had agreed on, a plain silver bell for the great hall, to be rung once a year on the morning of the pass, so that no king would ever forget what Mercy had bought. Amy came south with the first Ash Valley harvest, from land that was being replanted under its new and universally feared administrator, Martha's sister. Old Frank Dawson performed the rites, and if his voice failed slightly at the part about the crown finding its keeping in an open door, everyone present was kind enough to blame the wind. Lucy stood as first attendant, and she held the rings, and did not drop them, and later that evening she won a card game against 3 counselors, and a visiting alpha, and was heard to say that she had learned from the Queen, and that the Queen had learned from her, and both of those statements were true. Nathan gave the toast. This was a surprise to everyone, most of all Nathan. He stood up in the lantern light, flint-faced as ever, and looked at his king, and at the human woman beside him wearing a crown of summer flowers, because she had flatly refused anything heavier, and the old beta said this: "I told my king that bringing a human inside our walls was the worst decision of his rule. I am a careful man, and I stand by my caution, and I have never in 40 years of service been so glad to be wrong. Our histories will say that the king won the war. That is false, and I was there, so I will say what is true. We were a fortress of winter, all of us, long before Victor ever marched. And then one night, far away, a tired woman in an apron looked at 3 armed men and said one small word, and everything that has happened since, the light in the pass, the freed men at these tables, the sound of my king laughing, which some of you are still not accustomed to, all of it was hiding inside that word. Raise your cups. To the smallest word in the language, and the largest heart in the mountains. To the Queen, thundered back at him from 1,000 throats, and Grace Miller, who had once counted a $5 tip as a good night, put her face in her hands, and the alpha king of the 7 packs, laughing, gathered her in. They danced until the stars wheeled. At midnight, following the oldest custom, the new queen was asked to give the gathering a blessing, and the whole meadow went quiet, expecting the high, formal words. Grace stood in the lantern light, looked out at wolves and humans and freed souls sharing one long crowded table, and gave them the only blessing she had ever known to be reliable. "May your door be the kind that opens," she said. "That is all. That is the whole thing. Everything good that has ever found me came through an open door, wet, bleeding, hungry, or lost, and every wonder of my life started the night I decided a stranger's trouble was worth more than my own safety. So that is my blessing and my law, and it is a short one. Be the open door. The rest takes care of itself." Years later, that was the part everyone remembered. The rest passed into story, and the story traveled, the way true stories do, worn smoother at the edges each time. It crossed the mountains and the borders, and eventually, changed almost past recognition. It even drifted back to a small highway town called Hollow Creek, where the Silver Pine Diner still stood, under new management now, with one strange tradition the staff could never fully explain. The corner booth was never rented out, and never charged, and above it hung a small brass plate with no name, only a sentence, and travelers who asked about it got the same answer from the old regulars, Pete and Harold, who held court there over pie every evening, and swore on their coffee that they had seen the whole thing with their own eyes. "A young waitress worked here once," they would say. "Kindest soul on the whole highway, fed every stray on 2 legs or 4. One rainy night a hunted stranger fell through that door, and 3 armed men came in after him, and that girl stepped in front of a stranger's trouble and paid for it. And then a car with mountain plates carried her away, and the whole town thought that was the sad end of it. But letters came," they would say, tapping the table. "Letters still come. Her rent got paid off, and her debts, and half the towns besides, all quiet, all unsigned. And once a year, midsummer, a hamper arrives at this diner, with no return address, full of mountain honey, and the best pie any of us ever tasted, and a card in a woman's hand that says the same thing every year." And here the old men would point up at the small brass plate over the booth, and travelers would lean in and read the sentence engraved there, the message that came with the pie, every summer, without fail. "Still feeding strangers. Married the last one. Keep the door open." And far away in the northern mountains, on any given evening, anyone climbing the road to Black Ridge would find the great gates of the Wolf King's fortress standing open to the night, lamplight spilling gold down the steps, and if they came hungry, or hunted, or lost, they would find at those gates the one law of the realm that outranked all others, made by a queen who had once been shot protecting a stranger, not knowing he was the Alpha King, and who had decided, with her whole stubborn heart, that the door of her house would never close on anyone again. It never did.